I will not be finger pointing or giving bad vibes towards anyone while I look back on my life. I'll do it with love and forgiveness and hopefully fairness. I simply want to understand myself and my behavior, and I want to share the things that I learn about. Because it feels like this problem is so much bigger than me. It feels healing to explain my path. Maybe this new path I'm following to self discovery can lead to a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of my life. Maybe I can learn to understand and accept that I have the beauty of the divine within me. It's side by side with the darkness and pain. Both are mine and need to be understood and accepted. Maybe the shadows inside of me are not my enemy or something I need to feel ashamed about. I'm beginning to believe that my shadow side, otherwise known as the asshole voice inside of my head, the one that I always ignore or my first instinct is to suppress because I don't want to be mean or a negative person. I think that asshole voice inside of my head is a part of me that I need to look at the most. It may be the realest part of me. So, I'll focus on what I can remember, my feelings, impressions, and experiences that started me down this path. I do believe that the early years were very important years. Book 1, age 0 to 17. The biggest thing I can remember about being a very young child is that I can't remember at all being a very young child. I have flashes of moments sometimes. I have flashes of moments sometimes. I remember sitting on the back of an old slouchy couch behind my Grandma Theodora. I was brushing her curly salt and pepper hair and putting her rollers in. I had to have been younger than 8 years old because that's how old I was when she died. Theodora was my father's mom. She also had 9 other children. My grandma had to have been so tired. She was 16 when she was married to my grandpa. He was a philandering, alcoholic gambler. He worked hard as a construction worker, but most days he was at the bar. She raised all the kids by herself. So fucked up. But of course, I didn't know any of that when I was a kid. She died when I was so young. She died when she was so young. At 59 years old, she had a stroke and died suddenly while she was knitting. So basically, if I'm being honest, she let me torture her every time we'd visit. I would always be super excited to put her curlers in, and I was too young to grasp the idea of pulling hair and sensitive scalp. She let me do that because she wanted to feel close to me. That always stayed in the nice, soothing memory category of my life. I'll always remember the feeling of love I received for her while I ripped her hair out. She was a beautiful soul, my Grandma Theodora. She had to have been, because my dad loved her so much, and he was devastated when she died. I also remember bits and pieces of what grade school looked like and the playground, my friends' houses, my house, holidays and parties, family events, but that's about it. I grew up in a working class neighborhood in the Midwest. My parents were high school sweethearts that got married as soon as they graduated from high school. They were babies when they got married, 18 and 19 years old. The year was 1966. My dad was drafted into the Vietnam War, so as soon as they were married, he went into the Army. Family was very important to both of my parents. My mom was one of 3 girls. Her mom was Maggie. She was a singer in a jazz club. My grandpa Jack was a worker in a glass factory that filled water bottles. He'd always say, "Get off your ass and grab some glass." That's what my mom told me anyway. My grandparents were both full-blooded Irish. My mom was very proud of her heritage, and she passed that pride to her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well. I never knew my grandma Maggie, my namesake. She died when my mom was only 11 years old. My mom's sisters were 9 and 7. She had cancer of the female area. They couldn't really say what kind because at the time in the history of the United States of America, 1959, there was not a very high value placed upon women's health issues. We were considered to be a little less valuable than our male counterparts. Therefore, No one gave a flying fuck enough to even want to look into why my mom lost her mom when she was only 11 years old. Pretty sad and disgusting. I can tell you that losing her mom so young would deeply impact the rest of my mom's life and the lives of her sisters, the lives of her dad, and even extended family members were also forever changed. It didn't stop with them, though. The impact of that horrible loss would reverberate through the generations that have come from Grandma and Grandpa ever since. I was eventually very personally affected by the mindset my mom developed after losing her mom. I was also deeply impacted by the responsibility placed upon my mom after her mom's death, even though I wasn't even born yet. At 11 years old, she became the new mom for her two sisters. Suddenly and shockingly gone was the footloose and fancy-free girl that gave Barbra Streisand song concerts to her adoring audience of neighborhood kids and parents alike in her basement. Gone was the gorge yourself on candy from the corner store because your dad had a line of credit there and he wouldn't get the bill for another month. Welcome in a dad that didn't know anything about being a mom. And he even ordered all of her and her sister's clothing out of the maternity section of the Sears catalog at least once. Also welcome in a German woman and her son. They come in a few times a week to clean the house and cook and to try and help fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, also was welcomed in a need to fill all of the other gaps that were left unfilled when the wife and mother was gone. Who's going to moderate all of the bickering between the sisters and handle the schedule? Who's going to make sure that everybody did their work and their homework and practice and that Dad didn't forget any of his appointments? There was no discussion or consideration for the burden of responsibility placed upon my mom because she was the oldest and she was a girl. So duh. Actions, decisions, and ultimately the attitude my mom had about life was changed. After that, her own personal pain and loss entwined itself with her self-identity and her life goals and eventually her wife and parenting style. Her sense of family was all about sacrifice, duty, and persistence. She really loved my dad and all of us kids a lot. My dad was born smack dab in the middle of his 9 brothers and sisters. Yes, I said 10 children, and I know I already said that before too, but still, wow. Anyway, I told you about his father's behavior. He wasn't really around enough for his family, so my dad really worked hard to make his mom feel loved and valued and supported while he was still living at home, and even after he married my mom. He was instilled from a very young age with a sense of loyalty, dedication, and commitment to family. He was the glue that held that 12-person family together. Grandma Theodora was exhausted and broken-hearted, and Grandpa was purposefully oblivious and selfish. Somebody had to control the chaos of a household with so many children. Someone had to step in and be the reliable, honest, and trustworthy role model and touchstone for everyone. So my dad got to work and he did what he could for every member of his family. He kept those values throughout his life. After Vietnam, Dad started working as a truck driver and he ended up working that industry until retirement. Oh boy, did that man work hard. He only slept maybe 4 or 5 hours per morning because of many overnight shifts because of the higher pay. He'd barely sleep, then wake up in the afternoon, have his breakfast/dinner, talk to everyone for about a half hour to an hour, and then he'd get some fix-it household duties done before he had to go to work again. And that was his everyday life for over 50 years. Somehow, my dad managed to fix everything that went wrong in our house mechanically over the years. He kept it updated. He fixed all the family cars when they broke down. He helped everyone move houses, and eventually, when we were all grown with our own houses, he'd update them too. Dad worked hard. There was such a strong sense of loyalty, morality, and doing right about him. He would and could talk to everybody about everything. Mom said he had the gift of gab. He was just an all around hardworking, friendly, honest, giving, loving man that everyone respected. I'm speaking past tense because my dad died about 2 years ago. Excuse me. I'll write more about that devastating loss when I write about the later chapters of my life. In my youth, pardon me, I just take a little drink of wine here. Hard to separate myself because this is my life I'm talking about, and I want to not have it just be like focused on me, but my life is the example. So this was a painful process. That is very true and real. You know, it's real. Anywho, pardon me. Let me just calm down and we're going to go on about this story. All right, here we go. Pardon me. I'm speaking past tense because my dad died about 2 years ago. I'll write more about that devastating loss when I write about the later chapters of my life. In my youth, he was a very dedicated father. He wasn't home very much, but on the weekends, he'd take me and my siblings to a parking area that was close to the airport, where we'd pick up empty pop cans to recycle, and we'd pick up the trash while we'd watch the airplanes fly right over their heads right they were taking off. It was so thrilling, it was so thrilling and exciting to hear the engine roar and think for a second the plane was going to hit you. He also taught us to skip rocks on the water. Every fall, he'd bury all of us in the leaves after we raked up the lawn. He'd laugh when we jump out of them, faking that he was surprised. He built an ice slide every winter in our backyard. It started at the top of the hill and it swerved down to the bottom. When I was a kid, it was a massive power slide. Now that I'm an adult, it's just a gentle slope of a hill. He sparked imagination within all of us all of the time. He got a kick out of us, and that made me feel happy. My dad really loved my mom, and he loved all of us children. That was never in question. He was dedicated to my mom. To a fault sometimes, I think. The relationship was connected and interesting and vital and beautiful. But there was also unspoken tension and communication problems. Once again, this is me looking back. At the time, we were a really solid family. We still are. No alcoholism, no physical or sexual abuse, no drug addiction, just 6 people in a house trying to grow up together and figure out life as a team. They had 3 of us in a row. My older brother, Andre, me 11 months later. We were born under a year apart, and that's called Irish twins. My sister Bella would follow me 1 year and 2 days later. We missed Irish twins by 3 days. My younger brother Charlie, he was born 7 years after I was. He was an oops baby that was born immediately after my mom's IUD stopped working, excuse me. She would always tell me and my sister to watch out because the women in our family were fertile myrtles. I've actively been trying to remember more about my childhood over the last several years, and there is a situation that stands out in my memory. I remember a running joke in my family was Maggie did it. There was a dynamic where it didn't matter if it was me or one of my siblings that did something bad, like, I don't know, spill something or break a vase. I'd always be blamed for it. I'm not sure how old I was when this started. I know I was young, though, because I can recall that the stressful judgment moment. My parents were staring at all 3 of us. So Charlie, who was 7 years younger than me, he wasn't born yet. Usually, whatever infraction took place while my parents were gone, when they came home and saw the insert broke or spilt item here, they'd line us up and begin to calmly question us about what happened. My mom would get really upset. She might start crying and leave the room. My dad would get upset, not because of whatever we did, but because my mom was crying. And my mom would bravely collect herself, and then she'd come back, and then they'd start the Inquisition. During the Inquisition, there'd be this stressful silence that stretched on and on. I could feel their eyes staring holes into us. No one was fessing up. I knew it was most likely my brother Andre that did whatever it was that made them mad, but I'd never give him up because I was born ride or die. The problem was, he never gave himself up either. And Bella, she kept her lip zipped and her head down because she was no dummy and she wasn't going to catch any heat. This would always eventually result in a stalemate, a very stressful moment of standoff, a standoff so intense for me that it physically hurt. My head would start buzzing, and I'd get all hot and sweaty, and I'd feel lightheaded, and my stomach would tense into a knot, and the pressure would build and build to a point so indescribably uncomfortable for me to endure that I'd have to cave and say, I did it, just to stop the pressure. This would happen so often that eventually my parents caught on, and they knew that I wasn't responsible most of the time. And the little twisted part that I'd see as twisted later, at the time it was just a dynamic that happened in our family that we'd actually laugh about. But the twisted part was they'd let me take the blame, just to relieve the pressure for them too. So as a result, it became a joke to say Maggie did it before they'd even ask. I'd also received the punishment. I always figured it was a small price to pay to get exactly like a peaceful vibe going in our house again. I didn't say exactly like that was just me talking. It's half me talking, half me reading. Excuse me. I hope that wasn't too loud. And the microphone, I tried to pull it away, so I had to clear my throat, so I apologize. I didn't mean to be rude. Anyway, I always figured it was a small price to pay to get a peaceful vibe going in our house again. I really learned a take one for the team mentality with that experience. What I wasn't aware of at that age was that my physical response was a reaction to the stress, the anger, the fear, the frustration coming off of every person in the standoff. I'm an empath. Remember? I had no concept of that. And I had no concept that everyone else didn't have the same issue. I thought I was a wimp for giving in. But outweighing the feeling of being a wimp was a feeling of relief. I felt happy to make bad feelings stop and have peace inside of me again, and I have peace inside the household again. Just to be crystal clear, there's no way in hell or high water that my family would have intentionally hurt me. Not now, not then, and not ever. I'm seeing things as an adult now. I'm recognizing patterns and behaviors that affected me later in life. I've got a more complete and overall view now. I cannot, and I will not, lay blame at their feet. They really do not deserve that. My parents were basically children who hadn't begun to even understand their own trauma. War, neglect, death, not wimpy stuff. When they suddenly, within 3 years, had 3 children. They had to provide for those children, so no learning curve for them. Stuff your bullshit and just get her done, right? That's what they were taught, so that's what they did. I can't hold any animosity towards the people who have loved me the best way they knew how from the moment I was born. Absolutely nothing but love for them. But I do see clearly now, and I'm not going to lie about it. I wasn't guilty, so I should not have been punished. My brother, Andre, would have handled getting called out just fine if my mother would have given him a chance to. She revered and spoiled him. All of us, really, but really him. I think it was because she spoiled all of us. She revered him. And I think it was because he was the male child and she had no idea what to do with him. She already had 10 years of first-hand experience raising her sisters. She knew what she could expect from girls. But a boy? She didn't know any other way to mother him than to kind of smother him with love and affection, and never really holding him accountable for any bad things that he did. I was very protective of my brother because he learned from the way he was treated that he probably couldn't handle the more serious things in life. So he kept it light and playful and irresponsible. I also inadvertently learned to revere men and see them just a smidge more important than females. I also learned to view men as less capable and less resilient and more fragile than females about handling the emotional or troublesome aspects of life. My dad was trying to make enough money to help 6 people survive. He was not really involved in most of the family dynamics when we were young children. Duty, sacrifice, and being a provider were his main focus. Also, making sure mom was happy. My mom was familiar with girls, and she knew that girls could handle just about any insurmountable burden out there. She knew this because of all the burden she carried since she was 11. She knew a girl could handle sadness, and they could bear the burden of responsibility. My sister and I were held responsible. We cleaned, we babysat, we cooked, we helped with parties, and we gossiped with the other female relatives who were also there working and cooking while the guys took it easy. This was at parties. I can start to recollect more as I turned 11 or 12, but there is a gap, or several gaps in my memory about my childhood. Strange, huh? For some memories, it's obvious as to why they're easy to recall. But for some, it's taken me a long time to pull them out of my mind. It's caused me distress and anger and grief. Remembering is also clearing up any fogginess in the memories I have had in my journey to the understanding of self. So I think it's worth it. I think I'm worth it. I wrote a poem in the 6th grade. I can recite it from memory. The Rocky Shore. I sit upon the rocky shore, waiting, just waiting to find something more. I live on the sea, upon the rocks. I move on, my conscience knocks. Confusion overwhelms me as I walk through the sand. I try to figure out what's happened to this great land. Why is everyone so self-centered and cruel? Why don't people use their knowledge as a tool to help people like me come out of hiding instead of laughing at and mocking this merry-go-round I'm riding? At the time, I attributed my angst to having my first crush. However, looking back, I think it was much more. That poem was deep. I was 12 years old. I accompanied the poem with a chalk drawing of a beach, sand to water to sun. When I was in my early 20s, I reconnected briefly with someone I went to middle school with. I reconnected only briefly with her because the woman had a new boyfriend. Her boyfriend happened to also be the brother of someone I was close friends with in grade school. I used to sleep over at that friend's house in grade school. And suddenly, when I saw him so many years later, I instantly and for the first time remembered that he sexually assaulted me when I slept over at their house. I don't remember if it happened more than once or not, but I vividly remember waking up in the middle of the night to him having my nightgown pulled up and my underwear off, and he was licking my vagina. I think I was 9 or 10 years old. I also remember the eeriness of the way I felt. I woke up groggy and confused, and before I was awake, I looked down, I saw him, and he made eye contact, and he stared at me coldly while he silently got up and left the room. Complete silence. And I remember that I had this feeling, this very threatening scared feeling. His sister, my friend, was sleeping in the bed next to mine the whole time. Her bedroom was decorated in frilly blue lace everywhere. I never told anyone. I stuffed it down. I blocked it out completely. I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I didn't want to be the cause of an uproar or disturb the peace, and I didn't understand what was happening. In my mind, I was wondering, what was that all about? How do I explain the way I feel? It was really embarrassing and confusing, and I felt ashamed. Also in grade school, I must have been very young because my memory is very hazy, but I don't know, 8 or 9. I was at an elderly man's house. I remember that he lived across the street from my grade school. One day, my friend brought me to meet him after school. He was lying in a hospital bed in an oxygen mask. She took her shirt off as we walked into his bedroom. That's all I remember. I remember feeling embarrassed that she had nipples. She was 11 or 12. I didn't ever speak on that either. I blocked it out for decades. I carried shame about it, though, like I was made dirty from the experience. I felt responsible for my family's happiness somehow in my very young mind. I had this notion, but it wasn't because anyone said, "Hey, Maggie, every time I feel sad, take it from me, okay?" It was because I was empathic. I always have been. An empath is a person that can sense another person's feelings. They can understand at a deeper level what a person is experiencing, a natural helper. I go a little step further in my empathiness if I allow myself to be open to it, and for most of my life, even when I was not open to it, I can actually feel another person's feelings. I experience their feelings as my own. I also have a deep knowing about how to solve a person's problems or their troubles without them needing to explain what their troubles or problems are. I think it's called clear knowing, but I'm not really positive because I'm just beginning to understand it all. I'm aware that this is unusual, however, it's not an unheard of thing. It is real, and I believe that my unwillingness to fully accept and understand this about myself has hindered my ability to feel free and unencumbered as a person. It took a great deal of introspection and being honest with myself to be able to write that down with no fear of people laughing at me. Also, it took my entire life to be strong enough to deal with it if they do. I'm just telling the truth. In the current time of my life, I'm willing and excited to learn more about my God-given talents, and I want to embrace myself and try to learn so I can understand it all a bit more. For a good portion of my life, I'd say the first 45 years or so, I've been ignoring it or avoiding it, and for a long time, sadly suppressing it and cutting it out of my life completely by isolating myself purposefully. Being an empathic codependent can be a pretty painful combination of things. I think the Maggie Did It phenomenon affected me. I didn't know at the time, and I didn't know until I thought about things, until I really thought about things. How often do we as people do that? Just assess our lives as if it's different stages, and the powerful moments create a puzzle. How often do we put effort into trying to fit together those pieces in order to achieve clarity about our purpose and direction in this life? Not often enough, I don't think. At least not for me. I've never understood myself. Isn't that odd? I've just been so busy. What I learned from the Maggie Did It dynamic was that I could ease the tension and provide happiness and calm to others by being self-sacrificing. Just take one for the team to keep the status quo. Don't carry the stress. Transform that energy into something else that feels lighter and more happy, more hopeful. I was able to do that as a child. I didn't know or even think about it at the time, but that's what I would do to deal with the pressure. I had the innate ability to do that, and up until I was 14 years old. Beyond that, I felt like it was my responsibility to smooth over any upset feelings that may have resulted from any strong household tension. In my innocent and earnest way, I also took it upon myself to start being responsible for stress prevention by cleaning the spill ups or intervening in arguments. Jump on the problem so there is no problem. The problem was, and I mean duh, I couldn't fix anything for anyone, let alone everything for everyone. I am embarrassed to admit that I needed a full 45 years before I started to understand that. Up until that point, I honestly believed that I had the power to fix other people's stress and problems through intervening, moderating, deeply caring, sacrificing, and then taking over responsibility for the person's emotional and literal baggage. Once they were unburdened, I'd see their back as they'd whistle off and skip with a gee thanks. I built myself into a corner by being this way, the martyr, the silent sufferer. I didn't have any understanding about how I was being affected and how miserable I was feeling because I could never speak my truth about the fucking drama. So somewhere along the way, I just stopped speaking my truth. Don't you understand how lucky you are? You should be more grateful. We have food to eat and a place to live. People are starving. There's no good reason to complain, and you need to be more grateful and less vocal. Quit your bitching. So I did. Excuse me. I felt so repressed by not fully expressing myself. Perhaps because of that repression, I started to tune into people more. Eventually, I became so tuned into other people that I'd see clear through any falsities and directly into what they needed in that moment to lessen their burden. I'd react and act accordingly by the guide of my own intuition. I could see into the heart of what they were genuinely feeling despite what their outside facade was. I would fix it before being asked to fix it. I would fix it, or try to, even if they didn't want me to. What does the word boundary mean again? From the outside, I think my family looked at me and saw me as a girl that dealt with most stressful situations in stride and was not overly invested in any outcome. I firmly believed by grade school that if I showed any weakness or a need for help, I'd absolutely get help in any help that I needed. But the consequence would be that I'd hear the story told to everyone at every family get-together over and over again for the rest of my life about how I needed that help, sideways, passive, aggressive. A lot of that went on in my childhood. I did not understand the reasons why, but I felt the tension of it. I had no concept that I could be a separate entity from my family, an individual, especially as a child. I did not fully recognize that I was my own person, with my own needs and desires and ambition. I couldn't even imagine a scenario for my life that didn't directly involve an active debate about it by my family. And after that debate, majority vote wins. It was always a family decision. We stuck together. I was getting by in my childhood, and more than that, I was very happy-go-lucky, do-as-you-please one, even though I had so much internal conflict. Let me read that again because it was messy. I was getting by. My childhood was actually a very happy-go-lucky, do-as-you-please one, even though I had so much internal conflict. My family was a family that all my friends would envy. We all seemed so damn happy, and together as a family we were. We were a unit. I am, and I always have been, very blessed. I have eternal gratitude for the abundance of love and light that I've had in my life. Right now as I write, I'm pointing out the painful parts because that's where my way of viewing the world started. So it highlights the bad, but I know there was immeasurable good as well. I've always had a place to live. I've always had food to eat and family to count on, and when shit got real in life, I've never been alone. It gives me a huge leg up on people, a lot of people, and I've always been surrounded by people that love and care for me. Please understand that I know this and I honor it with everything I am, and I'll never forget or try to diminish those blessings. I did already have a set way of thinking, and I learned to be all of the ways I have explained so far. But I think the biggest turning point of my life happened when I was 14 years old. The day I went to the beach with some middle school friends, and we met up with some boys. I didn't know at the time that the girls I went with planned to meet these boys, who were actually 18 or 19 and 20-year-old men. My friends ditched me at the beach. They just left me. They left with two of the men, without saying anything to me. I wasn't aware that they'd left until the friend said he'd drive me home. The beach was a long walk from my house. I went with him. He parked behind an abandoned business only 8 blocks from my parents' house. He asked if I wanted to get into the back seat. I thought I was going to experience my first kiss, and I was nervous and kind of excited to go into the back seat with him. He raped me. He had me laying down with my head smashed into the door and my swimsuit crotch pulled to the side in about 2 seconds. In 2 seconds flat, he entered me. I was a virgin. I had never been kissed, and he violated me. I said, "Please stop." I was crying. He smashed my head on the car door repeatedly. He bit my breasts, which were already sore because I was still developing. He squeezed them. He hurt me. I was crying. I asked him to stop. I kept saying no. As soon as he carelessly ejaculated into my virgin, traumatized, vulnerable vagina, he calmly got into the driver's seat and asked me where to go. He dropped me off on the corner. He raped me, and he dropped me off down the block from my house. I remember thinking as I walked that block home, I'm not a virgin anymore. I just had sex. Did he think I wanted him to do that? I got home. I went straight downstairs. I took a shower. I assessed the damage. Blood on the crotch, bite mark on the breast, fingerprint bruising, scratch marks. I got clean. I threw away the bathing suit. I packed it up. I pushed it away, and I forgot about it for over a year. The memory was triggered about a year later when I found an old journal I used to write poetry in when I was a freshman in high school. In that journal, there were pages that I wrote down what had happened to me before I put it away and forgot about it. Everything on the page was written in a slanted and scattered way. I wrote it all down, everything. I remembered what happened. I reached a point where I couldn't avoid it any longer, so I told my parents. Unfortunately, they had a hard time buying it. I know that sounds shocking, but you have to understand, I suppressed the memory of that horrible day, but the feelings had to go somewhere. I started skipping school. I started drinking. I smoked pot. I was sheltered and naive, and this was out of nowhere behavior. It shocked and it scared my entire family. I tried telling a friend about it before I told my parents. I told her I was raped, and she started talking about the upcoming softball season and how fun it was going to be. I didn't play softball after that, and I was a damn good catcher. My parents didn't know what the hell was going on. What happened to their kid? I was running wild. I was drinking, smoking, skipping school. With every fucked up thing I do, I think they started to build resentment towards me. They were confused about my abrupt personality shift, and it eventually turned into anger and a need to do something. They brought me to a well-known psychiatrist that a cousin suggested they bring me to because he was her longtime friend. I spoke to him for about 4 or 5 minutes, revealing nothing. Then he spoke to my parents while ignoring me, and he said there is nothing wrong with this child. It's the age. In retrospect, the psychiatrist was trying to ease my parents' worry because he knew them personally through my cousin. He saw a kind of spoiled, bratty-looking teenage rebel. He didn't want to understand my suffering. He also didn't deem me important enough to really look at me or even ask me any direct questions. I think after the psychiatrist said that to my parents, it was just less stressful for them to believe that I was making things up to get attention than it was to actually deal with the horror of the thought that I was really raped and that I dealt with it alone for more than a year. It was easier and less stressful just to consider me a teenage rebel. They did want to help me, so I was sent to treatment for smoking weed. Alcohol and drug outpatient treatment is where I first learned the term codependency. I also learned about enmeshment. They talked a lot about family rules and dynamics. Part of the treatment was to involve all of the family in the healing process. Family night. Can I just say, my family fucking hated family night. Woo! He did not like it. Once a week, my entire family would meet and form a circle, and the counselor would ask about addiction and its impact on a family. And the stuff I mentioned before, like family roles and enmeshment. My brother Charlie was 8, and he never sat still, and he acted out the whole time. My sister was worried about me, but also she was mad because Mom was mad. My brother Andre was conflicted, but he didn't speak about it. My dad didn't say much at all. My mom was not shy about showing and speaking about her anger and frustration about what the family had to go through because of these sessions. Why was I so self-absorbed? Why couldn't I get it together and act normal again? Why can't we just go back to being the way we were? They didn't say these things to me, but the whispering conversations, their actions, their nonverbal communication spoke volumes. They tried to make it a family time event. We went out for pizza afterwards, and we all made sure we didn't speak about anything at all. Until the next time, the following week, when I'll have to go do the same thing again. We went to about 3 family sessions, and then the counselor asked my parents about incest in the family because my aunt was abused by my grandpa when they were children. They were honest about it, but the counselor started suggesting there was incest in our family. They were so insulted. We all stopped going to treatment. They were so angry at the suggestion. They were so offended that they forgot the reason we started treatment in the first place. So after we stopped going to treatment, collectively, we all just stuffed it in and put our chins up and we kept going. I started the 9th grade with a mohawk. I wanted to anyway, but my mom said, hell no. But she agreed to fully shave half of my head down to about 1 inch of hair. And as a compromise, I guess you call it a half faux hawk. A half faux hawk. Oh boy. I was trying very hard to fit in. I found a lot of joy in singing in the choir. I am an alto, and I've always found solace in music. I sang my first solo, Debbie Boone's You Light Up My Life, in the 6th grade. After that, I sang a solo in every concert there was until I graduated. I was also in a pop choir, and we'd go on tour and we'd sing for people. It was fun. Me and my brother Andre and our friends would try out for the State Fair singing contest every year. I actually got in and sang for thousands of people one year. It was such an amazing experience. So much fun running around with my friends, high school parties, choir tours, boys. I also began looking for love and affection and empathy and kindness by giving away sex. I didn't get what I wanted in return. I just had sex with multiple people. Emptiness. I still hurt so much. No one was going to save me. I was 16 years old when I met him. His name was Rory, and he was 19. I was in between my 10th and 11th grade years in high school. Rory was from across town and very mysterious. We met at a summer party. I got pregnant in the back of a pickup truck because it was so cool that he had a pickup truck in a campground. We trespassed on the campground so we could have some privacy. He thought I was really deep, considering I was so young. I was really mature, like an old soul. Yeah, like an old soul. I didn't speak to that man for almost 6 years after that night, only to tell him that I was pregnant and to try and get child support, and also to ask the medical history because my baby Alyssa was born with pneumonia and she almost died at birth after 27 hours of labor. She had lack of oxygen. She breathed in amniotic fluid during delivery. It was during that brief conversation about his medical history while I was recovering from giving birth to Alyssa. I was in my hospital bed and I just saw my daughter in an incubator with tubes and needles. She was purple from the lack of oxygen. It was then that Rory chose to inform me that he was also having a son with another woman. Alyssa and her half-brother are a few months apart in age, and the son was later named Al. And I'm not making this up. So anyway, I was 17 when I gave birth to my daughter. I was just about to be a junior in high school. The school wanted me out. Teen moms were not popular in the 1980s, but a funny side note is Madonna's song Papa Don't Preach was a very popular the year that I was pregnant, and I even learned the dance moves. I kept my baby, and that changed my life for me dramatically. I was sent to the basement of a local middle school where they held the MICE program, Mothers, Infants, and Children. I brought Alyssa to a home daycare across the street. It was okay for a while, but I missed everything so much. I missed my choir. I missed my friends. I missed fitting in. I was so isolated. I rebelled. I insisted they take me back, and they were infringing on my rights. It caused quite the stir because they were all still upset about my pregnant belly being prominently displayed at a choir and pop concert, and it went into the yearbook several times. They kicked me out of pop choir after that embarrassment, but they did eventually let me back so I could graduate from my high school. The last 2 years were really hard because I took care of Alyssa, and she didn't sleep much at first. I was living with my parents, but they were very, very clear. Your child, your responsibility. I was grateful I had them nearby, though. One night when Alyssa was just a few months old, I was so exhausted that she would not go to sleep. I was in school. I was working at a fast food restaurant. I was tired. I squeezed her to me. I was getting mad. I squeezed her hard, and my dad came into the room and he said, "Let me take her, Megs." I was so scared of that feeling that I had in me just then. I never want to hurt any child, let alone my own child. I learned a really important lesson that night. Anyone is capable of doing anything if the circumstances are right. I was always mindful of the need for sleep after that, and I was also very grateful for the calm and beautiful way my dad handled the situation, because in that moment, I learned that anger and frustration can be diffused with calm and love and patience and reason. Thank you, Dad. I was no longer thinking about being raped. I was no longer focusing in on getting love from boys. I didn't have time to focus on anyone else's problems. I was a mom. Most of my friends were no longer my friends once we graduated. I had to focus in with laser precision to figure out how I was going to support the child I chose to have. My parents loved us both very much, but said we had to move out as soon as I graduated. It actually broke their hearts to do that. They never really explained it to me fully until many years later, probably because I was incapable of understanding it at the time. They knew they would not be able to resist the urge to just let me continue being young and irresponsible, because I was still a kid. I was very much sheltered from the darker side of life, as much as my parents could control, throughout my entire childhood. I just didn't realize that until I grew up. I thought I was wise and jaded by the time I graduated, but I was a kid. I knew that life could be hard. But by the time I was out of school, I had already been working part-time and passing all my classes and taking care of Alyssa and trying to keep up with all my friends. I knew about the hardships in life. For as jaded as I thought I was actually a lamb in a world full of hungry wolves. My parents knew they'd end up raising Alyssa, while I figured out how to be an adult at a much slower pace. That wouldn't have been fair to any of us. Now, as I think back, I absolutely believe they made the right decision. Alyssa was my choice and my responsibility, and she was my child, not theirs. I can fully sympathize with how horribly painful and difficult that decision must have been for them. Unfortunately, at the time, I had no such insight. I was a confused, sad, lonely person. I felt rejected and abandoned. I was also unknowingly suffering from PTSD, and I was desperate for solace, attention, support, validation. This was the end of my childhood, though my childhood had really ended years before. I thought I had already been through the worst. I did not know what was to come or how deeply I was hurting myself by not dealing with my trauma. I only knew that I would do best to be strong and committed to my family and their well-being, and I would never give up fighting to give Alyssa a good life, one that was full of love. Check-in. What is enmeshment? Enmeshment is a description of a relationship between two or more people in which personal boundaries are permeable and unclear. This often happens when an emotional level in which two people feel each other's emotions, or when one person becomes emotionally escalated and the other family member does as well. A good example is when a teenage daughter gets anxious and depressed, and her mom in turn gets anxious and depressed. When they are enmeshed, the mom is not able to separate her emotional experience from that of her daughter, or even though they both may state that they have a clear personal boundary from each other. Enmeshment between a parent and a child will often result in over-involvement in each other's lives, so it makes it hard for the child to become developmentally independent and responsible for her choices. How can I know if I'm in an enmeshed relationship? Those in an enmeshed relationship are often the last to see it, but with awareness you can start to recognize some of the signs. If you cannot tell the difference between your own emotions and those of the person with whom you have a relationship, or if you feel like you need to rescue someone from their emotions, if you feel like you need somebody else to rescue you from your own emotions, and if you or another person do not have any personal emotional time and space. That description came from, it's called fullshearttransition.com, and it's spelled FULSHEARTTRANSITION.com/enmeshment, ENMESHMENT hyphen symptoms, SYMPTOMS hyphen AND hyphen CAUSES / Ooh, that was a mouthful. That is the source for that enmeshment information. This is the end of book 2. I've got one last paragraph, and this part 2 will be done. My family did not want to cause me harm. If anything, I believe the love they had was strong and true, but it got distorted somewhere along the way by fear and anxiety. It's like you love someone with every fiber of your being, so much that you can't stand the thought of that person experiencing pain, so you must shelter that person, the person you love so much. Shelter to the point of constantly deflecting harm from hitting that person. Only you can't. You can't protect them from hardship or pain. So you imprison them instead for their own good. Imprison them with family loyalty and honor, with constant reminders of not being able to decide or do anything on your own because you might not be able to handle it. or it might come as some sort of distress or pain. Better not try it all. Better to stay where it's safe. Thank you so much for listening.